Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to talk about what we have to talk about today, since it really builds off of much of what we've heard already. We're here to talk about the next level of decarbonization, or leveling up, as I think somebody mentioned before. With me, I'm Angel Lance, founder of the National Public Utility Council. That is a group of people within the utility industry that get together to talk about what's working in decarbonization and what isn't, sharing industry practices amongst the utility group to try and learn and to level up. With me, we've got Andrew Singer over there. I'm going to give him a chance to introduce himself. Nancy Bui-Thompson and Emeka. Can we start with you, Andrew?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Singer. I'm in from Baltimore. It's very nice to see actual people. It's been a while, and I don't work for utility. I work for Constellation. We used to be part of Exelon until a few months ago. We're the largest clean company here in the U.S. I'm responsible for all of what we call our regional C&I customers throughout the U.S., about 100,000 customers. And I've been doing this long enough that I no longer recognize anybody in the room when I come to a conference.
Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Bui-Thompson. I also don't technically work for a utility. I am on the board of directors of the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, also known as SMUD. We're the country's sixth largest public utility. We're one of the few public utilities that each one of us, the 7 board members, are elected. I represent over 215,000 constituents. I'm serving my 4th term, which is my 14th year on the board. So that's my nights and weekends job. And during the day, I'm the Chief Information Officer for WellSpace Health. We provide healthcare for over 110,000 patients experiencing homelessness who are uninsured or on Medicaid.
And I'm Emeka Anyanwu. I'm the Energy Innovation and Resources Officer at Seattle City Light, which is the municipal utility of the city of Seattle. And so my title is, I hate to disappoint everyone, I happen to be the only utility person. Oh, mic's not working. Can everybody hear me? Okay, maybe get it a little closer. So I'm a 20-year utility person, and my title basically is a fancy way of saying I align a number of different activities that we have that are preparing our utility and our community for its energy future. So lots of work around grid modernization, electrification, and program design. Certainly our technology foundations and roadmap is something that I've been working on for the last couple of years as well. And then I also have a responsibility for our resources area, so resource planning, managing our long-term energy contracts and some of that work. And so it's really sort of aligning, again, all the pieces of our strategy to help us be ready for the future ahead.
Excellent. Well, I think we have a nice group of differing perspectives, and we're here to explore the concept of next-level thinking. I want to start off with a quote from Albert Einstein that I think helps set the stage. He states, and I'm going to read it so I don't ruin it, but he says, "We can't solve problems by using the same level of thinking that we used when we created them." In terms of next level thinking, what we've done to get us here won't get us to the next level. We're here at the Energy Thought Summit to really consider new ideas and leveling up in terms of the utility road to decarbonization. So with that in mind, if you had to dream up what ideal state would look like for the utility industry or the energy industry in terms of its road to decarbonization, where might you start? Maybe Nancy, we'll start with you.
Well, we have to start with our customer. And that's not a new item, but I would say that starting with the customer has changed in terms of our relationship. So for the past 100+ years, it's been typically one direction, right? We provide, it's usually a monopoly, there's not a lot of choice. We provide energy one way. And as we look in the future, we have to realize that it's going to be bi-directional, not just with batteries and direct to grid, but bi-directional in terms of how our customers think about us as a utility. It is no longer just a service that they turn their light on and expect it to be on. They have higher expectations now that we have to meet, but at the same time, keeping the rates low and competitive. And that's the difference, and I think we're very lucky. We both come from the public power space, is, we are here for our customers, we're owned by our customers, and so as much as they would love to go green, they don't want to spend a lot of green. And so we have tied our rate increases to CPI. So our rate increase, if you look traditionally for SMUD for the last 14 years that I've been on the board, has anywhere from 1% to a big push at 3.5%. And people ask us, how do we do this? We do this because we've been planning for a long haul ahead, but we also have to look internally at operational efficiencies, but also what our customers can do to lower their usage. We tell people we are the only company in your life where we will give you money to spend less. Who else, especially today at the gas pump, can say that? So it's changing the mindset of both how we perceive our customer and also how our customer perceives utility that will lay the road to decarbonization.
Excellent. How do you feel about that, Emeka?
I think that's really great, and as Nancy said, we share the pedigree of being in public power, which means our perspective and our certainly value proposition is always about being an asset to our community. And I think what your quote is really well placed, because I mean, as the saying goes, what got you here won't get you there. I think probably the single biggest, most important factor for us is that the next level, the next generation, the next era of energy services has to be more equitable and inclusive than the one that preceded it. I mean, even for us in public power, as much as we have been founded and put in place to deliver community value, we've missed at times on including all voices and all perspectives and all needs in that. And so, for us, we're actually in Seattle, we're working backwards in a sense. Backwards is probably not a great term, but it's sort of reversing, if you will, the trend. And we are starting with those voices that haven't traditionally been heard. We are prioritizing driving value to communities who have historically been left out, our environmental justice communities, BIPOC communities, and making sure that this next generation of energy services, this next era of energy services drives value to those communities first. And I think, for us to be able to accelerate in the ways that we want to, that's going to be the key. It's going to be sort of an all of us solution. As Adrian Rodriguez was saying before, it's an and, right? And so if you're going to incorporate all of the options, you need to incorporate all of the people. And so that's sort of the way that we're approaching it in Seattle.
Awesome. Andrew?
I think that I've been involved now with what was the next level when the first deregulated megawatt hour flowed in Rhode Island and into California about 25 years ago. That was the first time that the entire energy industry became competitive in one market and then grew from there. The cool thing when all of that started was that it wasn't just that you could buy a megawatt hour competitively, it was that you could put your own meter in. So hearing the discussion about AMI and talking about data and access to information, the fact that it has taken over all of these years, 2.5 decades, to get to a point where people are finally having access, I would agree with both Nancy and Emeka that it's about the customer, but it's also about access to information. If I would look at the Einstein quote, I think what I would look at and think about is a plethora of data. The ability to access data and to understand where you are right now in this world of either brown power, green power, sustainability, decarbonization, my home, my business, my community. Without data and access to that information, it's all just things in the news or on your phone. Having access to information and seeing that, to me, that's the next level. Being able to access it and understand it is really taking it beyond where we are right now.
That flows a bit into what we were going to talk about next in terms of prioritizing the customer, or really how they might be receptive to many of the changes that we hope to instill. Next level thinking is not current level thinking. And a question would be, do you think they'd be receptive to it? But as I'm listening to the different approaches, would they be receptive to being prioritized as number one? Would they be receptive to being included in the creation of next level? It seems to me that they would. Do you find any difference in your customer base?
I would say there's a large difference in our customer base, and I appreciate Emeka's comments, because for so long, the people who had the voice at the table were the loudest, And those typically are the people that have the time to come to a board meeting, to call you, to email you. Those are typically those of a higher income threshold than the rest of us. So my story is I grew up on welfare. I grew up on subsidized housing. There were times where we did not have a roof over our head. And I can tell you, putting solar on the roof and learning about cars, EVs, were not a priority for my family. And the difference now is that we still have this very vocal, very chirpy group that would like us to continue to subsidize solar and all of that, which we would love to, but the pot is only so large. What has been a focus and has been a large push is the reasoning that we all want to go green, but at what cost and on the backs of who? Because when you look at solar subsidies, if you look at rooftop solar subsidies, I have rooftop solar. Where is that money coming from? And that analysis wasn't happening before. It was like, oh, the money's moved around, it's a bit of a shell game. And now that focus that we have of looking at our priorities and making sure we bring the underrepresented populations and going to where they are and creating heat maps. I mean, SMUD was one of the first entities in California to create our own heat map in terms of social economic ability and access to not only food, jobs, and other resources. We started a program called Sustainable Communities. Because usually when you think of utilities and grant making, we as utilities give a lot of money out, right? That's part of who we are. But it wasn't that strategic. And we really weren't looking at overall impacts. And so with our Sustainable Communities program, we realized that how people can pay their bills is if they're happy, so mental health, right? Is if they're healthy, access to healthcare, if they have the financial resources, jobs and jobs development, right? So we looked at those gaps and we started a program with community partners to say, where are your needs? Because we used to just look at community giving as, let's just give grants out. Now we're looking at it as, how can we more strategically partner so we can help the person in a 360 way so that they can eventually pay their SMUD bill, right? And so I think that perception of changing what is our role as a utility, what is our role as a company in the industry, is it just grant making and giving out a lot of money like Santa Claus? Or is it, let's be more effective and efficient with the dollars that we have, focusing on the populations that aren't going to be coming to you, complaining, writing, being there at the table, and making sure that that chair is there for them, even though they physically can't be there for you. So I think that's a different mindset as to looking at our populations and to not only pay attention to those who you hear the most, is to ask the questions as who are we not hearing from, and how can we bring them to the table?
So next level decarbonization is strategic community building. Awesome. How do you feel about that, Emeka?
So I think that's really true, right? I mean, and I think the perspective that I have on that and that we have used in Seattle is that you have to change the paradigm. You have to go seek those voices out. We need to be beyond the days of, sort of setting up a table in the community center and waiting for folks to come to you. You really need to go find people and meet them where they are. You need to think about language services. You need to think about, sort of different media for communicating and prioritize, right? And then measure, right? Keep yourself accountable to those outcomes. Are you reaching the right populations? Are you talking to the right people, the right community leaders, the right community-based organizations? Are you getting that feedback? And is it showing up in your decision making? And can you play that back to them and show them where their input has influenced that decision making? I think, Andrew said a really important thing earlier when he was talking about sort of, data and sort of how you implement this stuff. And I really do think that we are now to a point where it's really important to start practicalizing these sustainability objectives, right? And so it's about more than just writing objectives and creating slogans and putting logos and advertisements and that kind of thing. But it's really about thinking about, okay, what are the pieces and parts of the way you plan your system, the way you make decisions around infrastructure, the way you make decisions around investment, we're having sort of an interesting moment for ourselves in Seattle that I think is pretty common to probably most of the utility folks in here, which is we've all been through this era sometime in the back half of the last century where we installed a whole lot of underground cable. And much of that cable is now coming to the end of its useful life. And guess what's interesting about that, of course, is that for many places, a number of different utilities, when they transitioned from overhead to underground, there were these programs. Oftentimes they were surcharge programs where neighborhoods were able to contribute or pay to prioritize their undergrounding. And I'm sure I will shock the room when I say that the places where most of that underground infrastructure is capitalized is in neighborhoods of certain means, right? And so now that those things have reached the end of their useful lives, of course, as Nancy was saying, the way we had those conversations back in the day, not a whole lot of thought was put into, okay, what happens after these assets see the end of their useful life, right? And so now it becomes a subsidy back that is socialized across the rest of your rate base. Except if you do that, you are now perpetrating the same inequity, the same lack of inclusion that we've had historically. And so that kind of community conversation, right, innovative community relationship is about having the conversation with your community that says, look, if we just approach these things, this concept and the way we think about assets and rate base and how rates are made, again, trying to get there the way we got here, you will end up perpetrating or exacerbating existing inequities. And so having a different kind of conversation, talking about what are the kinds of solutions, talking to those communities, because it may be very well true that some of those communities that have been left out, they don't necessarily want you to go on their streets and tear them up and put it underground. There are non-wire solutions. There are other programs. There are other things, values you can bring. But you have to reach out to those communities and talk to them about what they want, and take the time to do the education and, quite frankly, overcome the trust barriers that we have put up for ourselves as an industry. And so that's part of the work.
I like the way that you framed that. Andrew, you have a different set of stakeholders. Do you agree, or your thinking align with what the utilities are hearing from their customer base and how they want to reach out and create community? I mean, from an exterior perspective, do you have an opinion on what your clients are telling you?
On a utility basis, in the competitive markets, we partner with the utilities, whether it's a actual partnership or it's just default by the fact that we're both involved in the plug and the wall, if you will. As we say, we're involved when the spark hits the grid, but the trucks that are rolling are not ours. I mean, we have a separate company that rolls trucks, but not for utility or transmission or distribution purposes. However, if I could take just another view of this, agreeing with what Nancy and Emeka are saying, and I believe the operative word is "and," one can look at it from an economic perspective, which is where you have competitive markets and where you have the ability to buy other than from the utility. The design initially of deregulating that industry, the energy industry, was to create the ability for customers to, by managing risk and understanding what they're doing, eventually hit a level of budget whereby they could potentially save money. And we still see customers, the main driving force behind the customer buying with somebody other than the utility is to save money. And in markets like Texas, where you're basically kicked out of the nest automatically through the rules of ERCOT, people are constantly driving for the lowest, safest price. Now, people found out during Uri that not everything was as safe as they expected, and I'm sure that the corporate boards, et cetera, found out that maybe they need to, personally look at, licensing and requirements, et cetera. With that said, though, customers are looking to save money. I guess the best example I can give is we see large industrial customers all the time. I was in a defense contractor's office years ago, and this is when the federal government started requiring X% of what we were calling green power only at the time before we had additional terms. And they looked at me and said, "Andrew, we need to be double green." They didn't do the quote marks. I said, "Double green, what's that?" "Well, we need to buy 10% of our power has to be green, and it's got to be, green. It has to be the same price as brown." I said, "Well, I can get you 10% green, but there's nothing coming off the grid that's green right now that's going to be the same price as that evil brown power that you refer to." So even now, seeing where storage is, seeing where DG is, seeing even looking at, we talked about nukes just before, looking at the price that's going to come out of small nuclear units, everyone is striving to still get back to that price of, well, what if we built a coal unit or something like that? I'm not advocating that, but that still is the benchmark that people are looking at, or a really efficient gas unit. People are still trying to get to that number that they knew we could get to. Now, obviously, gas prices are very high right now. I think we have a 6 handle on natural gas, and that's where a lot of our electricity is derived from in a lot of the country. But with that said, people still want to be able to show a decrease in their energy budget year over year, and that's not happening this year. And for the population that's being addressed here as part of this discussion, that's terrible. That's just terrible. It's criminal that we can't find a way to bring efficient, low-cost power to everybody that wants to have it in some way, shape, or form. But the way that we can get there, along with funding and other movements, is to have technology be able to take over. We all wouldn't be carrying cell phones if we hadn't broken up the bells a million years ago. Competition does create certain things, and I think that technology jump is still something that's happening, and what we're going to see next is storage, DG, and other things really hitting that brown price level sooner than we expect.
That's kind of a nice way of framing it in terms of power sourcing all the way through down to the community or through the community. How do you feel that federal funding might play a role in what comes next? We have lots of different bills and initiatives happening. We have an energy discussion on the table that is everywhere from the administration on through. How do you feel like federal funding may impact your initiatives? Maybe Emeka, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Just now, almost exactly 2 years ago, when the pandemic was sort of hitting and we were all sort of trying to figure out what we were going to do with ourselves, we looked at that moment at Seattle City Light and we saw opportunity. And so, what we certainly didn't know what we didn't know, but we thought, there was a recovery to come after this pandemic. And so one of the things we did is we went out, we took a cohort of some of our brightest, most dynamic thinkers, and we created this portfolio of projects, concepts. We called it Utility Next Seattle City Light 2.0. And what it was something to prepare us for what we thought was going to be the federal recovery to come. And that, of course, has played out, right? And so we have seen everything from renewable hydrogen pilot project to, we're studying a network of microgrids at the Port of Seattle, and all kinds of sort of opportunities that we've been able to capitalize on. Because here's the thing, right? I mean, we're talking about the cost of the transition on our communities and our customers, on our ratepayers. And the reality is the federal government and the resources the federal government can bring to bear are a crucial part of finding a way for us to accelerate that transition without laying the burden of that on sort of working families in our communities. I think, Andrew, again, sort of talked about the value of broad footprint marketplaces, right? Something that is probably way less novel to him out east than it is to those of us in the West, right? And we're working really hard on that. But again, one of the things that is really important to that, and was talked about in one of the previous panels, is we've got work to do on our transmission infrastructure. We've got investment that needs to be made there. And it's more than just the infrastructure itself. It's siting and permitting and getting things through in the timeframes that we have, right? And so the federal government has a large role to play there. I think the other thing that the federal government really can do, and that we've tried to capitalize on, we have a great relationship with the folks at the Pacific Northwest National Lab, which is in our region. And so we work really closely with them because they also bring tremendous technical expertise and ideas to us about sort of the ways in which these technologies, as Andrew was saying, are going to come about and which ones we can leverage in our areas. And even things like there's a really great work, Dr. Bobby Jeffers at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, has done extensive work on social burdens of resiliency, right? The cost of resiliency or the cost of outage, right? Which doesn't accrue equally, right? So, the folks who can have a major disaster and can, get in their truck or get in their car or maybe even get in their, chopper and fly off to their second or third vacation home are not experiencing that disaster the same way as the families that are stuck in communities and dealing with the outages and the devastation. And so really thinking about how do we prioritize investment based on those social burdens of resilience and reliability, I think is also a role that the federal government can and should play going forward.
We have always said hello and yes to as much federal funding as possible, right? No one has ever said no, thank you, right? But we also realize that it's not going to come as quickly, efficiently, or at the amounts that we would like to see. So SMUD, as you all may be well aware of, we're the first large utility in the country to have a zero carbon by 2030 plan, which is very different than net zero by 2030, which I've seen. It's zero carbon by 2030. So we have a plan in place today. It was presented to the board 3 weeks ago that based on today's technology, we can get 90% there. It's that 10% that scares us, right? It's that last bit. And this is where we hope and we pray that the federal government will be able to accelerate the programs that we have today, because we can't do it alone. I mean, we've, as public utility, we've had a long history and a wonderful relationship with the federal government, but they don't move as quickly as we would like them to. So as much as we will anticipate and hope, we have to plan forward without it, and that we know when the money does come, it's basically going to be an incubator, accelerator for us. And that's what happened when we received $127 million for our smart grid infrastructure for AMI. We received the largest grant in the West in 2009. We were able to amp up our efforts. We already had a plan for our smart grids and our smart meters, but having that $127 million grant helped us achieve those goals much sooner. And 2030 for us is going to be here before we know it. And so being able to partner with the federal government, we hosted the secretary. She came last month to look at our battery storage facility and academy, was very impressed. 4 weeks later, we don't see any checks coming yet. So, we have to realize that it's going to be through partnerships with up-and-coming companies, with traditional companies, with other utilities. It's going to need to be a buckshot approach. I mean, someone earlier talked about, it's no longer just these large utility scale. Don't get me wrong, large utility scale, much more efficient. But because it's going to be so challenging to get to zero carbon, we have to look at the smallest level, down to the multifamily unit for us to get there. There is no way on the utility alone without having a flexible, multi-pronged approach that's looking at our internal finances, so operational efficiencies, looking at how we serve our community, looking at EV, consumer to grid, looking at virtual power plants, pretty much anything and everything that sounds reasonable, and even those that may not sound so reasonable today, our R&D group is looking at it, because we just don't know what's going to be the next big thing. And so that's going to be the big push for utilities that are traditionally much more conservative. We also, we always used to say we'd like to be on the cutting edge and not the bleeding edge. That's what we always used to say. Now we want to be on the bleeding edge because we cannot wait for others to figure it out. So we have to be the driver, because at the end of the day, it's our customers who are expecting that from us, and we can no longer be the passengers.
Well said. It sort of leads us into another concept around, so I want to state that I think SMUD and SEL are both doing incredible work in terms of decarbonization, and I feel like your utilities are on the forefront, really, in many ways, of the efforts to decarbonize and the ins and outs on how to make that equitable for all of our communities. You spoke to some of it just now, Nancy, but you talked about incubation, you talked about thinking through solutions all the way down to the individual household level. But given SMUD and SEL's success, I would say, in really leading the decarbonization effort, is there anything else that you would attribute that to?
I would say traditionally our community and our board and our local leaders have worked really well. And I think that has been our trademark. So if you look at, we all see the JD Power, that actually means something to us in our community. that our customers and our business partners know us and like us, because we know how it is, right? Like I hire my day job, I hire a ton of people, and a lot of them come from fancy schools. What I learned over time, I think is very, applicable to utilities, is if you're liked and they care about you, you're gonna do a good job, right? You could come from, MIT or Harvard, but if we just don't like you and you're not a nice person to deal with, I don't want to see you. And I think that's been the big difference with SMUD, is like people are actually happy to see us. When their power is out, we have video on Twitter about just how excited that our customers are. It's like the truck rolled up. If you look at other utilities, they're yelling at them, they're upset, when is my power gonna be on? And I think that's just been the partnership that we've laid for the last 75 years. We're all individually elected. My personal cell phone is on the website. I get all the emails. I do have staff in the office, but I personally answer every email, every text, and that's the way our staff is too. And I think that has given us a lot of goodwill, because have we been perfect all the time? No, we've made plenty of mistakes. But we get that grace because we truly are community partners, and our community knows that we come from the right place. And yes, we're gonna make mistakes. It has happened. It recently happened with our solar rollout of changing the net metering rate. It wasn't fun. But I think that we gained a lot of goodwill because we were able to acknowledge the missteps, and we had that built-in trust of 70 years. And that's the difference. And even for utilities that may not have that, relationship, you can always start tomorrow. Tomorrow is always a different day, and it should be a better day, but it's really how you approach your customers and how you treat that customer. A person, we're all humans. We know when someone's coming from a good place. We know when someone cares. And just because you had a reputation, and I've seen this where companies can't get out of their own rut, you can if you start to trust and believe in that relationship that you have with your customer.
Emeka?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I would definitely say that we look at and look up to SMUD in that way, in terms of that customer relationship. That's certainly something that we're striving really hard and putting immense focus on, putting our customers first and changing the paradigm, and starting, as Nancy said, starting now, building that relationship. I think historically, we certainly have had really delivered good value to our customers. And really, one of the advantages we happen to have, obviously, because we are in the Northwest, is we have access to these great carbon-free hydroelectric resources, right? And so that's a really great place to start if you're going to decarbonize. But it is also sort of thinking about how you're going to leverage that, right? Because really now, for us, 2/3 of our emissions in the Seattle area, the greater Seattle area, are transportation-based. So how do you electrify that, right? So how do you begin to look at those new end uses? We have some of the most advanced and sort of forward-thinking sort of policy movement around decarbonization, around the city of Seattle had a climate action plan 2013 that we've been working on, and a whole variety of policy movements that we have done in order to sort of really focus on that. And this is a part of the country that really has, the whole West really, but certainly in the Northwest, a long legacy of environmental stewardship and focus on carbon reduction, right? Places where, energy efficiency was sort of really grew up, right, in the 70s. And so that is a thing for us that has made a difference, right? But again, continuing to build on those customer relationships, engaging the customer groups. We started this conversation talking about the importance of a more inclusive system. I think, that is part of the way in which we lead this transition, so that it happens in the way that it can be sustained, in a way that it doesn't leave folks behind. And I think that's going to be really important as we get to this next era, this next phase.
And Andrew, moving off of what Nancy and Emeka have to say, I mean, your customer base is moving, deeply down a decarbonization road, and these folks here are really at the forefront of that. Does the way that Constellation interfaces with utilities differ as a result? I mean, do you take a look at how they're moving forward and align with that, or are you in step? How do you feel that you've reached down through their organizations?
Yeah, I think I have to take the opposite side of the question. I appreciate the question. We're taking our signals for decarbonization from customers. We as a company have very, very aggressive goals to be completely carbon-free as a company in a very short period of time. We have the largest fleet from a nuclear perspective, as well as wind and solar, that is carbon-free as well. The signals we're taking are the signals from the market. So on the federal government side, the other way to look at it is, as opposed to taking funding from the federal government, I serve the federal government. So if the federal government asks me for a very large military facility to be 100% carbon-free, well, we have to source that power somewhere. If they say carbon-free and they accept nuclear, that's a little easier. If they say carbon-free, sustainable, RECs, giant yellow, orange extension cord from a windmill, then we have a problem, because that supply doesn't exist in the level that people want. So the government looking at the market as a customer can make huge changes, but it's a question of how they're going to do that. I remember speaking many years ago when President Obama first came into office, and the discussion around energy policy was, might there be a 30% or more requirement on regular customers, business customers, to be, at the time, we'll call it green. And the entire discussion was, oh my goodness gracious, just based on supply and demand, there was not enough quote unquote green power to do that. So people were asking questions, if I don't get in early, am I suddenly going to be paying the equivalent prices that people are paying for natural gas now in Western Europe? Or what was going to happen at that time? Now, most of that did not come to bear, but the immediate panic of people worrying about whether there was a supply for the demand that would be created through requirement, that was what worried people. So the signals we're taking are from the market. The good news is the market's signals right now, at least up until recently, where we've had a bit of major volatility just based on the gas market, where still a majority of power comes from, which are regular power plants. The signals we were getting was, we want to be sustainable. We want to be carbon. We want to do what feels right at the moment, and that's what I'm hearing right now. We want to do that. But once again, what's driving it in the background is budget and the ability to deliver. Despite what we pay for a cup of coffee, nobody wants to pay $10 for coffee. And if all of the coffee is being made by everybody with sustainable power, that could end up happening. We all know various brands that are buying green because that's what we would expect. And various other brands that are out there doing, you all know names of groceries and businesses and transportation companies that are buying green. But we see it in our pricing as to what's going on. So what I'm seeing is the movement within market factors at the moment. The utility, with all due respect, has tariffs. They do the right thing when they can, and they're also providing a very, very needed service, which is actually providing service to people. And if the trucks are rolling and people are smiling, that's an amazing thing. Because in Baltimore, when the trucks are rolling, it's not always smiles. And that's where I am right now. So it depends what's happening. But quite frankly, I'm seeing more market and economic signals that are showing us that if we can figure out a way for technology to catch up and for people to right-size requirements over time, I think the movement has a chance of really, really moving in the right direction over a framed period of time, as opposed to all of us sitting here 10 years from now wondering if we got to the next step or not. We're going in the right direction and people have gotten the right messages. I also think as the workforce turns over, I think the next generation is coming in with an idea of what they're looking for, and they're willing to make some sacrifices financially to make it happen.
Well, that's actually a nice lead into, in our last few minutes, discussing where we've come from in this conversation, which was what got us here won't get us there, right? We can't solve this problem with the same thinking that got us into this problem. So given that, and your vantage point through the market base, if you had an opportunity, as you do, to advise the energy industry on how to next level, how to level up moving forward, what would you advise them to do?
It's a great question. I'll go out there and I'll give an answer from our first speaker, which is I would have people invest in R&D. R&D, that's not my specialty. I'm not a scientist. I went to school with scientists, not one of those fancy schools, though. But that's not my forte. But when I get to go to EPRI conferences, I'm the kid in the back just saying, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And if technology and R&D can make the investments, and people want to make the investments because the market's there and they see what's happening, we could be making power like this and just light up the entire room. I mean, there aren't even energy efficiency bulbs and everything in this room, and this is a cool hotel. But I'm sure they'd want to if they could, but it's a matter of what's already here. But I'd want to see money going to R&D in a bigger way. I'd want to see everybody knowing what's going on. I mean, whether you like Elon Musk or not, it is, for me personally, it's just kind of cool to see our equivalent maybe of what people thought about Thomas Edison or Benjamin Franklin back in the day. Just somebody that's saying stuff that's forcing things to happen. My personal opinion only. But that's what I would love to see, more R&D.
Awesome.
And I would agree. So SMUD is one of the only utilities that has large-scale R&D, but also that has created our own mobility center. So SMUD was a founder of the California Mobility Center, and this is a worldwide organization that has brought together both public and private partnership to have a hub to foster the next generation of that light bulb, right? We don't know what it's going to be quite yet, but investing in AI, in mobility, transportation, but we also have a workforce component of the CMC. This is in conjunction with what we have internally with R&D, because as I mentioned earlier, we generally know how to get to zero carbon by the 90% of known technology today that we can expand, scale, zhuzh up in a different way. But what is missing is that 10%, and that's why we are putting our money, not only internally at SMUD, but also in the CMC, and hopefully with federal funding to find what that is, what that secret sauce is. Will it be something absolutely revolutionary? Probably not, right? But will it be a combination of known technology today that can actually scale? I think so. I mean, even small programs that we're kicking off, virtual storage, right? So we were one of the first utilities in the country to have virtual solar shares, basically solar shares, that we built large utility scale solar fields out in Rancho Seco, which used to be our nuclear plant that cost a couple billion up and a couple billion down to decommission. But now we have utility scale solar. So now we're one of the first utilities in the country to pilot our storage program, right? We're looking at virtual power plants. I mean, so all these programs are renditions of things we already know, right? But what we hope with our R&D, both in internal R&D and external R&D, is that we will find some combination, some secret sauce that we can scale to the levels that we'll need to really get us to zero carbon, because we can't just do it alone, right? If SMUD gets zero carbon by 2030, yay for us, but that's not going to change the world, right? So it's going to take us working with all sorts of partners to share our ideas and invest in that R&D, because we don't know what we don't know quite yet, but it's going to take money and resources and time for us to work together and be much more open to sharing both our resources and our expertise. Because I think in the past, a lot of utilities were very much is what's mine is mine, and same with companies. And now what I'm seeing is we are one race, right? We're the human race. We're also needing to look at where we should be going and not where we thought what we should do. And so that's only going to take all of us as a partnership together to get and find that special something. And hopefully that special something is for the greater good that we can all capitalize on.
Yeah, I'm so glad that Nancy talked about the California Mobility Center. I'll tell you, if you're ever in Sacramento and have an opportunity, it's really remarkable. I had an opportunity to visit there about a month ago, and just incredible, right? An example of what can happen when civic and private partnerships come together for a common goal. And I think that's both Nancy and Andrew are spot on, which is sort of thinking about the investment in the R&D that it'll take for us to get through to the next level. And part of that is not just the investment, certainly. Some of us have more resources than others to put directly into R&D, but it's also really true that what you will hear from lots of the researchers at places like EPRI and the Department of Energy is that they are looking for real world use cases. And if utilities will engage right? And really invest themselves into the idea of supporting that research and making, don't just say, well, we've got lights to keep on or we've got trucks to roll and we don't have time for that, right? Which is sometimes the traditional response you get. Really choosing to invest in that, I think, is important. I think it's really true, though, again, we finish where we started, which is that, again, talking to your communities and figuring out how to engage, especially, so we have the benefit, obviously, as a municipal utility of being sort of a sibling department to other city agencies, right? So we talk to them directly every day about sustainability. We talk to the Department of Neighborhoods about what's going on in communities. We're talking to our Department of Transportation. Again, all of these folks about mobility and transportation infrastructure. And so for utilities that are not part of a municipal structure, reaching out to those agencies, it's a little bit of a ask your doctor if electrification is right for you, right? Like, really think about how to engage those communities. We think about electrification, and EVs get all of the pub, right? All of the shine. But the reality is, of course, for many of the communities that we serve, transit makes a difference, right? And so for us in our transportation electrification strategy, we actually pinpointed transit, and that's why about 2 weeks ago, we were proud to stand next to our counterparts at King County Metro, the bus transit provider in our county, to unveil their new test charging facility, right? Because that's the way, right? Sort of innovating that utility relationship with that agency. No more sort of tell us what load you need and we'll meet you at the meter, but really we embedded engineering staff and technical staff and operations staff in their process, in their design for 2.5 years. To ensure that we got to the day that we got to 2 weeks ago. So it's really that. The final thing I'll say is be prepared to not consider any taboo areas, right? So rate design is one of those areas for me, right? Where I think a lot of times we just sort of accept the understood truth about the economics of rate design. The reality is, of course, paying for these things is going to probably need to be different. We have a program in Seattle that we have announced late last year. It's called Renewable Plus. And what it is many of our large customers who have sustainability goals willing to pay for a premium product where they are taking responsibility for influencing the regional mix, right? On a big level, right? So essentially financing the cost of a major renewable project through a bundled product that they get, energy and RECs, and we retire the RECs on their behalf, right? And they pay for that because they recognize the value proposition of that. And that's a way to both influence, again, the addition, to Andrew's point again of listening to the marketplace, the additionality of those new resources while ensuring that, our already burdened customers on the lower end of the income scale are not paying the freight. So again, being willing to rethink those rate paradigms and those economic paradigms that are the underpinnings is also a really, really important place for us to have our eye on.
So I'm hearing the road to expedited decarbonization or next level thinking on decarbonization includes things like higher touch, higher emotional intelligence, higher innovation and investment in terms of market structure and maybe elements within that. All strangely maybe more connected to our communities in every direction is really the theme I took from this conversation. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for joining me in the conversation. I found your comments to be insightful, and it's fun to have conversations within utilities, outside of utilities, and everything around it to talk about this thing, as I think you put it, Nancy, that affects the one race, the human race. And our perspectives on how we move through that. With that, I'm going to conclude the panel and see everybody maybe at the next National Public Utility Council where we discuss more of this at a later date. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for our last but certainly not least Keystone speaker of the evening.